My golden child brother used my inheritance for his failed business, and my parents sided with him when I wanted it back, so I left them. My brother, the golden child, secretly used my inheritance to fund his failing business, leaving me with nothing. My parents always favored my brother, James. He was the star athlete, the charmer, the one who could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was just me, Sarah. I got good grades, but that was never as impressive as a winning goal. I always felt like I was living in his shadow, even though our parents insisted they loved us both equally. After our grandfather passed away, he left a considerable amount of money to both me and James in two separate bank accounts. The money was to be released on our 25th birthdays. On my 25th birthday, I was excited to use the money for a down payment on a house. I'd been saving, but it wasn't enough on my own. I logged into the account expecting to see a healthy sum, but it was empty. I called the bank, thinking there must have been a mistake. They told me that the money had been wired into another account. I inquired and was informed the account belongs to James. I called my parents, they told me they knew, but had agreed to give James the money. I demanded to know what was happening, and they told me that James needed the money more than me because he had just launched a new tech startup that was about to revolutionize education. He needed the funding. They tried to assure me that it was an investment and that James would pay it all back plus some. I was completely stunned. My own parents gave away my inheritance to my brother without even consulting me. They didn't even ask if I needed it or if I had my own plans. I called James, furious, but he simply said he'd return it to me later. I tried to reason with him, but he talked down to me and said it was in everyone's best interests. I found out later that the revolutionary tech startup was nothing more than a poorly designed app that no one wanted. It was a failure, a sinkhole for all of my money. I was left with absolutely nothing from my inheritance. I cut them all out of my life after that. I moved to a different city and got a job. I didn't speak to James or my parents for 5 years. Update 5 years later, and I received a letter from my mother. She said that James was now asking to move back home because he is having financial struggles and needed help. My father thought that James was being punished enough already, and that maybe it was time that we all try to get along and fix our family. My mother also said that she was sorry for taking away my inheritance and that she wants to make it up to me. I didn't respond for about a week. I was torn. A small part of me missed my family, but a larger part of me remembered the pain they had caused me. It took me a week to process this letter. In the end, I decided to send an email to my mom and told her that I was willing to meet her and my dad for lunch, but that I absolutely did not want James to be present. I made it clear that any further attempts of communication from James would be ignored. I wanted to see for myself if my parents had truly changed. When my parents and I met for lunch, they looked older and worn down. They talked about how life at home had changed without me, especially for my father, who according to her was no longer as talkative as before. They said that they were in a difficult situation with James. Apparently he still had not gotten back on his feet, and that he was starting to spiral with depression. I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction at that, but I still felt like an evil person for enjoying his suffering. I just couldn't forget that they chose him over me. They did not mention my money at all during lunch, and they did apologize for not consulting me. They told me that they missed me and that they wanted our family to heal. I agreed that I wanted to heal too, but that there was a lot of damage to address. I was very blunt when I spoke to them. They agreed, and they said that their first step was not allowing James back into the family home, at least not until he got a job and learned to be responsible. They were even thinking about setting up therapy for him to work through his problems. It was still unclear if he had taken full responsibility of his action. I agreed to consider seeing my parents more, but I made it clear that James would not be part of the equation until he apologized to me for what he had done and also returned my inheritance to me. My mother agreed. I didn't expect to go to lunch with my parents and finally feel like they actually changed. But it seemed like my 5 years of silence made them look at things differently. Update 2 a month later, and my father sent me a text asking me to come home for dinner. He said that my mother had been constantly checking up on James and that she was really worried for his health. So she's been pushing to have James over for dinner at least once a week. I told him I still wasn't ready and that my father would understand why if he was in my position. I also suggested that he should also ask James why he did it. My father agreed, and it was crickets for the rest of the day until my mother called me. She was screaming over the phone that I was preventing her from being a good mother, and she was also saying that I was hurting James by isolating him even more. I responded by saying that James deserved to be hurt for taking my money without my consent, and that he has no one to blame but himself. She yelled that he was still my brother, that we needed to help him, and that I was being unreasonable. I asked her about my money, and she ignored me before asking me how I could be so heartless. I hung up the phone and blocked her. I then texted my father, he replied back, and he told me he understood. He then sent me a message that James would be coming over to visit them. He said he felt like he had to respect my mother's wishes. It felt like he was taking my mother's side. I ignored him for the rest of the day. The next day, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered, and it was James. He started apologizing to me. I asked him about my money. He said that he was trying his best to earn the money to return it back to me. I asked him how much he had saved, and it was barely anything. He was just working a low-paying job. He even mentioned that he hated his job so much and wished that his startup had worked so that he wouldn't need to deal with this kind of thing. It was clear that he still had the same superiority complex that he had always had. He still thought that he was better than everyone else, and he felt that he deserved more just because. I ended up saying that he only had two choices: either return my money with interest or take on full responsibility for his actions. James was shocked that I would ask him that, and he started accusing me of being ungrateful, of wanting him to suffer, and of being heartless. I told him to go to hell and hung up. I then blocked his number and blocked my mother's number once again. I called my father. He said that he understood, and that he would not try to interfere between us again. He also told me that he understood why I was hurt. I ended up moving closer to my father so that we could spend more time together. I still haven't spoken to James or my mother. This story didn't have a nice resolution, but I felt that I needed to stand my ground and that my actions were the right thing to do. I'm no longer living in the shadow, and my brother is suffering the consequences of his actions, and I'm fine with that. I feel like my family has healed, but not all of it. My father and I are closer than ever, while my mother and brother are basically estranged from me. I guess that's how it ends sometimes. It's sad, but life is not a fairy tale. My brother's wife used me as her personal bank, so I exposed her manipulation at her wedding and shut it down. I, 32F, have always been a bit of a pushover, especially when it comes to my family. My older brother, 35M Liam, has always been the charismatic golden child while I was the quiet, responsible one. When Liam announced he was marrying Amelia, 30F, a whirlwind of a woman with a seemingly endless supply of energy and opinions, I was cautiously optimistic. I wanted to like her, for Liam's sake mostly. They'd only been dating a few months and I had a strange sense about it. The wedding was fast-tracked to happen only 3 months later because, of course, it was. Liam, being Liam, never has the money. I'd already planned to help a lot, but I'd already expected that. As I got to know Amelia, I thought things were good, but things were just off. Amelia seemed to like me, at least on the surface, but I always felt like I was being assessed or judged. I put it down to her being nervous about marrying into our family, something we've all been doing for years. Then the wedding planning truly kicked into high gear, and everything got very weird and tense. The budget was somehow simultaneously non-existent and exorbitant. The expectations shifted like sand in the wind, and I found myself in a constant state of trying to guess what everyone wanted. I helped pay for the venue, the photographer, and the dress. I even helped Amelia find it. Liam's job wasn't exactly stable, and it seemed like he hadn't fully understood how much money a wedding actually costs. I became the mediator, the planner, the piggy bank, and I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach that I was walking right into a trap. The day before the wedding, I discovered something that threw everything into disarray. While helping with last-minute setup, I overheard a conversation between Amelia and one of her bridesmaids, a mutual friend we both went to college with, named Claire. It was an innocent conversation at first about the decorations. Amelia said that she found a way to get all the decorations for free, and I was curious. I knew she was struggling to keep up with budget. Claire asked, "How did you manage that?" And Amelia laughed. She said, "Oh, you know, my dear sister-in-law-to-be. She is so easy to control. All I have to do is show her some pretty stuff and tell her it's for me, and she is opening up her checkbook." I thought this might be a joke, but there were no other laughs. Claire was just nodding. I was so angry and sickened by the casual manipulation. I felt completely foolish and used. I excused myself, went home and cried and stewed. I didn't know what to do, what to say to Liam or to anyone. I wanted to cancel it all and tell them to all get lost. The next day I showed up to the wedding, stiff and with my heart in my throat. I smiled politely and did all the things, but inside I was raging. During the reception, I decided enough was enough. While they were doing the first dance, I quietly stood up. I got everyone's attention, and with a microphone in my hand, I made an announcement. I recounted the conversation I had overheard the day before. including all the details about Amelia seeing me as a tool and how easily I was manipulated into paying for her wedding. The room went dead quiet. I could feel Liam's eyes boring into my soul. Amelia's jaw had dropped. I then went on to say that I love my brother very much and that I wish them the best, but that I would not be tolerating this type of behavior from his new wife. I then said that, as the provider for the entire event, I was shutting it all down. The band stopped playing and I left. I don't know if it was wrong or right, but I couldn't stand to see her be rewarded for this behavior. Update 1. The aftermath of my wedding announcement has been nothing short of explosive. Liam called me later that night in a mixture of anger and confusion. He accused me of trying to ruin his wedding and embarrassed him in front of his friends and family. I calmly repeated the conversation I had overheard, and he went quiet. I could tell he was conflicted. He said that Amelia had denied it, claimed it was a joke taken out of context. I said that it was not taken out of context at all. He asked me to forgive her and give her a second chance, but I refused. I told him that Amelia was a manipulator and a liar, and that I deserved better. I was really mad that he was taking her side. I told him I wasn't going to support their marriage at all anymore. Then came Amelia's barrage of text messages. She called me a liar, a jealous sister, and she said that it was not her fault she was getting married, that my brother loves her. She insisted that she never thought any of those things, and that she doesn't even like Claire that much. She had been very drunk that day and wasn't thinking straight. I replied that I was not going to forgive her, and that the next conversation will be via lawyers. I was a little worried that I had overreacted in my rage, but the support from my close circle of friends was overwhelming. They had always sensed Amelia's calculating personality. They said they were proud of me for standing up for myself, and that I shouldn't let anyone walk over me like that ever again. Several people had witnessed the events and said they were shocked by how calm and composed I had been during my announcement. I was told I was being vindictive and selfish for trying to ruin a day I'd helped pay for. I was told I wasn't even the bride, so I shouldn't even have an opinion on the wedding at all. It is not my place to judge. I wasn't the one getting married. It was her day. How dare I try and ruin it? This made me start to doubt myself a little, but I knew I was right. Liam kept trying to persuade me to reconsider, and I told him that I am not the problem, that he is the one who married someone who doesn't see my worth, even as a financial tool. The last thing he said to me was that I was going to regret it. I'm standing my ground, no matter how hard it is. I'm not going to let anyone treat me like a doormat anymore. Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since the wedding debacle, and the fallout continues to unfold. Liam is now living with Amelia at the house I paid a chunk of the down payment on, the one they were never supposed to live in. Turns out his job was only temporary, and her job is just her doing makeup on her friends. I've spent the last few weeks cutting all ties with them both, which has been easier than I expected, and also more painful than I thought. I'm talking with my parents about the house, and hopefully, we can just sell it for an actual profit. But I'm bracing myself for my mother to say, "But he is your brother," and just talk it out, forgive and forget. My relationship with my parents is a bit strained. I always knew it would be. I don't think I can forgive them for enabling Liam all of his life. My father gets it. He isn't stupid, but my mother is not even trying to understand. I had a very hard conversation with her last week. She just cannot grasp that sometimes it is better to walk away. My father, however, sent me a text message this morning that he wants to have lunch with me to talk. I'm a little apprehensive. I really don't want him to be the peacemaker, but also, I really want to reconnect with him. I ended up taking a long trip with my best friend and just focusing on myself. I started going back to art classes. I started dating someone. I have not been happy in a long time, and it's good to finally feel the sun on my skin again. My friends, and I have a running joke now that I always shut down an event when it gets too much, just like I did at Liam's wedding. I've made a commitment to myself to always put my well-being first and not compromise on my values. Amelia has tried to reach out multiple times via texts and emails, but I've blocked her and her friends everywhere. I refuse to even give her any of my time. I was a bit shocked to learn how manipulative she actually is, and it has only served to reinforce that I made the right choice. I've spoken with Claire again, and she apologized and said that she would try to convince Liam. She admitted that she was not the greatest friend, but she did appreciate that she did not take it out on her directly. I still haven't told Claire I overheard her part in the conversation. She still thinks that it was Amelia alone. I have no plans to forgive Liam, and I may never forgive Amelia. My life is much better without them in it. It took me way too long to figure this out, but I am glad I did. Sometimes it's better to just walk away, no matter how hard it is.
My brother falsely accused me of stealing his car after I gave him almost $100,000, and my parents believed him, but the truth came out eventually. I, 35M, have always been the quiet one in my family. My older brother, Richard, 38M, has always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I work as a software engineer, a stable, if somewhat solitary, life. Richard, on the other hand, is a charismatic sales executive, always with a new story to tell and a new deal to close. Our parents, Thomas and Barbara, 68M and 65F, dote on him, always have. I've never resented it exactly, just accepted it as the way things were. Last month, Richard called me, a rare occurrence, sounding panicked. He said he was in trouble, big trouble. He wouldn't say what exactly, but he needed money and fast. He needed $100,000 by the end of the week, or something terrible would happen. Richard, in all his years, had never once asked me for money. We aren't a rich family, not by a long shot. My parents are retired, and while they have savings, it's nothing that could cover that amount of money. It was always Richard who was doing well and buying my family luxurious things. But this time it was different. He needed help, and he came to me. I told him that I didn't have that kind of money. I'm not a millionaire. I would need some time to gather that much. I could maybe get half of that money at max. He said it wasn't good enough, that he needed it all, or he would get hurt. I didn't know what he had done, but it made me nervous to say the least. Richard said he couldn't tell me, but I had to trust him. I was skeptical, but the desperation in his voice was enough to convince me that this wasn't one of his usual tall tales. I dipped into my savings, liquidated some investments, borrowed money from our dad behind our mother's back, and managed to get him almost the entire amount he asked for, minus about $10,000. It wasn't the full amount, but I had to go to some pretty dark places to get even what I managed to. We met at a local diner, and I handed him the cash in an envelope. He didn't explain why he needed it, just took the money and walked away. I felt like I was in some sort of movie. I had to sit there for an hour drinking coffee trying to calm down. A few days later, my parents called me. Richard had accused me of stealing his car, the one that Mom and Dad helped him get when he got his promotion a year ago. It wasn't a big theft, no fancy sports car, just a nice practical sedan that Richard needed for his business trips. They said Richard claimed I'd broken into his apartment while he was out, stolen the keys, and driven off with the car. I was stunned. It made no sense. I would never do anything like that. I had no use for his car and had my own vehicle. I told them it wasn't true. Mom was hesitant to believe me, but Dad believed me outright, as he knows I am not that sort of person. But she was on Richard's side. She said, "Richard doesn't lie, he never has." I was flabbergasted. My own mother, after everything I'd done for my brother, and now she accused me. They asked me where I was the night the car was allegedly stolen, but I have no alibi. I was at home playing video games and sleeping. They pushed me harder on what I do on the night of the supposed theft, and I simply couldn't remember the exact timeline. I said I went to bed at midnight, but that might be later than usual because I was playing a game. I tried explaining to them about what happened a week prior, and that he was the one who came to me looking for help. They dismissed it as some sort of coincidence or something like that. They said he wasn't going to ask his brother for that sort of help because we aren't that close. They thought I was just making excuses. They wouldn't believe me. The police got involved, questioned me, and searched my house. Found nothing, of course. Richard pressed charges. It felt like my whole world was falling apart, all because of this false accusation. It was awful. I felt betrayed by everyone and alone. My own brother. I couldn't believe it. Update 1. The accusations spiraled quickly. The police investigation led nowhere, confirming my claim that I didn't have his car. There was no evidence linking me to the theft, because I didn't do it. Yet, Richard kept pushing, making public statements about me, portraying me as this bitter, jealous younger brother, trying to bring him down. He went as far as to say that I always had anger issues as a kid and was always jealous of him. He brought up all sorts of things from our childhood, in an effort to make me look bad. My parents started treating me like I was actually guilty, looking at me with this mixture of disappointment and suspicion. I couldn't reason with my mother at all. I tried talking to her in private without Richard knowing, but she simply didn't believe me. She kept saying, "Richard always has a reason for the things he does. Why are you lying to your mother?" She had become this echo chamber for Richard's accusations. Even after the police investigation had concluded, and they had found nothing to link me to the theft. My dad tried talking to Richard behind Mom's back and had asked why he was doing this. He said that I was probably lying and hiding the vehicle. Dad had told me everything behind my mother's back. He was feeling extremely guilty for the way Richard was treating me. Dad offered to talk to him. I told him not to bother. This made me furious. I felt totally betrayed. I felt like Richard never saw me as an equal. He never believed that I could do good and get money. It's like he believed that I could only be evil and do bad things in the dark, because that was what he projected on me. My friends stood by me, at least they all believed in me, but the damage was already done. I felt so alone and I wasn't sure what to do. Then, a few days after that, I got a text from an unknown number. It simply read, the money, the car. Think about it, don't trust your brother. I didn't know what to do. My entire family has always believed Richard's lies and made them out to be the truth, and now this random person tells me that they might be connected. Something about this text just made sense. I knew I was being framed by him, and the person who texted me seemed to know this as well, so I decided to dive deeper. Update 2. I decided to follow the lead of the mysterious text. I hired a private investigator to look into Richard's affairs and the circumstances surrounding the car theft. I still had the police's report about the alleged theft, which mentioned that he was apparently in a business trip in a nearby city during that night. So the private investigator was focusing on the whereabouts of Richard on that specific night. He was supposed to be attending some sort of business event according to his calendar and alibis. The investigator discovered that there was no event. He had actually spent the night at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town with a woman who was not his wife. They also uncovered that he has been making shady deals on the side, possibly involving some sort of fraudulent practices with a new company that recently opened near his workplace. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach at that discovery. Could it all be related? I finally understood what was going on. He didn't want the family to know what he had done, and that he would need to get rid of all the evidence. The investigator eventually found Richard's car parked in a nearby garage, hidden behind boxes and other debris. A key to the car was found in an envelope attached to one of Richard's business documents, which was in a desk of his side company. It was all a setup. He staged the car theft to make me look bad and to deflect attention from his shady activities and his affair that might expose him to his wife and our family. The investigator also found proof that he was being blackmailed by someone in that company, probably the owner, who demanded an outrageous amount of money, hence the money I gave him earlier. The blackmailer threatened to expose everything if Richard didn't pay up, which was why Richard had come to me. I had gotten the blackmailer's business card from the business documents. I called them up and agreed to meet in a park in public, just so I can get to know what they know and not get hurt. It turns out the blackmailer was also being blackmailed. It was a whole chain of lies and schemes, and it all stemmed from that initial act of fraud Richard had committed. So, to save his own neck, he decided to make me the scapegoat. He was trying to manipulate my family by lying and spreading misinformation, and now it was all falling apart. It was all disgusting, and I was so disappointed. Richard is such a coward, it's unbelievable. I contacted the police and gave them all of the information that I had. My brother got arrested for fraud, blackmail, lying to the police, and false accusations against me. Update 3. The arrest was messy, but it was also such a relief. Richard is currently out on bail pending trial, but his reputation is in tatters. My parents had a hard time believing it at first, even with all the evidence laid before them, but they eventually came around. My mother especially felt terrible after realizing that she didn't believe me for so long. She apologized to me and started crying after hearing what Richard had done. My dad admitted that he felt foolish and sorry for not trusting me more from the beginning, but was just confused and sad when Richard started lying. My relationship with my parents is slowly healing, but it's going to take a lot of time before they truly regain my trust. It is going to take a lot of work to make us a family again. I confronted Richard while he was waiting for his trial. He didn't deny any of it, but just looked at me with this mixture of anger and resentment. He said he did it because he was desperate, but deep down I think it's because he hates me. He can't stand to see me live my life, that I was simply not as miserable as him, and I needed to be dragged down to hell with him. I had enough. I never wanted to see him again. I filed for a restraining order so he can never contact me again. I moved to a different city for a while to try and put some distance between us and to simply breathe a little bit. It's going to take a while to recover from this, but I'm glad that the truth has finally come out. My life might never be the same, but at least I know now who my family truly is. I was always the quiet one, I never wanted to cause trouble or stir up drama. But now, I know that I can also be resilient, even when everyone is trying to push me down. I know what my values are. I know who I am, and I'll never let anyone take that from me. The mystery text came from the person who was being blackmailed by the original blackmailer. He knew that Richard framed me, but simply wanted Richard to get his comeuppance. He sent that text to try and make the truth come out. He contacted me again, saying that it was not him behind Richard's actions, and that he would never be so cruel as to drag a family into his drama. I thanked him, and that's that. Everything is now as settled as it can be for now. It's a start at least.